Hi, everyone. Welcome so much to our Facebook Live session, Being Your Best Self and Transforming Your Relationships. And I'm so excited to have our special guest. For those of you that are tuning in for the first time, I'm Joy Marchese. I'm the founder of Positive Discipline UK. And I'm joined today by one of my colleagues and my mentors, Dina Emser, who is a leadership coach, a positive discipline lead trainer, and she's the co-creator of Empowering People in the Workplace. And so, Dina, thank you so much for joining us. She's joining us actually from the United States tonight. So she's in the daytime and we're in the nights. So thank you for being here. Welcome.
Thank you, Joy. I'm delighted to be here with you.
I know it's really nice when we get to just hang out kind of online.
Absolutely.
So I've been following you a lot, although we work together and we see each other on Zoom calls, and we'll be doing Empowering People in the Workplace, hopefully in June online. We were supposed to do it live in London, but we're going to transfer it virtually. But I've noticed on LinkedIn, you've been posting quite a few articles about really the current situation and the disruption in our lives and what's happening now. And I love the titles of them. And I would love to, if we can, to begin by discussing some of those topics, because they're really big topics when we think about the workplace and life in general. So the first topic I'd like to talk about tonight is you called Lead with Acceptance. So in this article, you made what I think is a really big statement. So I'm going to read it. You said, what if as leaders and people, we could lay down the struggle and resistance, any blame or judgment about what is true for us today, and simply accept the situation? So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I just notice in my coaching specifically about how much time leaders take struggling. And so I think it came up for me that this disruption really does give us an opportunity to look at the things in our lives and our work that have been working and things that have needed to be recalibrated for some time. It gives us an opportunity to look. If we spend too much energy railing against it, wondering why it's happening, taking it personally, blaming others in different countries, blaming our political figures for not handling it better. To me, it's just a useless waste of time and energy. So I thought, what if we could just start from not evaluating? We over-evaluate anyway. What if we could just say, well, it's here. It is, providing us an opportunity of sorts. Let's take advantage of it. So it's mostly just trying to figure out how can I prioritize my time and energy to be the most productive in ways that are helpful rather than hurtful.
So how have you found, either in your own work or that of your colleagues or companies you're working with or leaders that you're coaching, how have you found them able to do this, the acceptance or even the prioritizing?
So it's interesting that the focus for me has been, I've been trying to ask people to pay attention to what are the biggest little things you're doing that are making a difference. Because, and the other way I think of it is the power of the pivot. So you and I both know that change is not easy for anybody.
Yeah.
But when we feel like we have to literally knock it down and start all over, it's overwhelming. But if we can really prioritize the things we're doing that are working, the things that are making us feel that connection. I mean, I loved that you started with the word, let's connect first. And then let's look at productivity, and then let's look at encouragement. That connection means everything. So when you're on a Zoom call, for example, how do you and I create that warm connection that we feel immediately when we see each other across the room?
Yeah.
There are little things we do. So how can we build and tweak those little things, recalibrate those small things first? So that's been my focus. And it feels to me like the people who have been most productive making those small pivots have also been most successful in getting whatever their offer is or whatever their work is recalibrated to this new way of doing it from a distance.
I love that. I hope I say this correctly. The big little things that you're doing. And,
Yeah.
I would agree, for me, change is really difficult. And, you said, like, it's almost like starting over, right? Like, I feel like overnight, literally overnight, I went from like a busy working parent, that travels for work. Um, and I mean, I
Mhm.
actually had to resign from my teaching profession so that I could have time to do it all. And then overnight, it was like, boom, I'm a stay-at-home mom, and it was like,
Right.
what do I, and I love it, but I was
Yeah.
like, what can I do? And these Facebook lives are like one of my big little things. And part
Yeah.
of it is, how can I help others, right? How can I contribute
Mhm.
and help people? And the other bit is, how can I kind of, connect? How can I feel connected, in a sense, to the greater community? And this has been one of my big little things. So that's interesting. It just struck me as you said that. So thank you. I like
Yeah.
that. So if you guys who are watching, I
So
know we have some people on from London, we have New York, we have Toulouse. So if you're on here, if you can put in the comments, let us know what big little things you're doing right now during this
yeah.
time. And let's try to, inspire each other um, as a group. Uh,
Yeah. One of the things I was thinking about, though, before we talked, Joy, I was trying to think, okay, so, just anticipating what you might ask, when we look at the online team working remote, it feels to me like the people I've talked to have said, having a schedule is really important. But if your boss came up with the schedule for you without consulting you or without imagining what your home life is like now, if you have young children, that makes a difference. If you have a spouse with whom you're sharing an office, those things all make a difference. So,
yes,
having a schedule, yes. Coming up with a schedule together that works for everybody on your team, that's one of those big little things that I'm
yeah.
suggesting. It makes all the difference. Do people feel more connected and encouraged? Absolutely. And then can they be more productive? Of course.
Yes. And it's interesting you say that, because I'm looking, my husband is working from home full time, and those first 2 weeks, they bombarded them with meetings and meetings and He was on Zoom, I think, like the entire day. And I was really glad that we sat down and made a schedule. But I think that very quickly the management and everyone realized that they couldn't do that. It wasn't going to work for everyone, just dumping meetings and meetings on them. And so they really pulled back, and they asked people. I was so happy they asked people, what's your situation like? What would work for you? And they came down with just
Yeah.
at least only just like a morning check-in and an afternoon check-in. And I think, and it's,
Right.
not for more than 30 minutes. And I think at least, I can cover those times while he's on there. If he can be flexible sometimes
Right.
during the day, that can help. But, I think that's so important, is that um, I've been hearing the biggest challenge for a lot of working parents is really not having the childcare, both parents having to work and juggle this whole experience. And companies
Exactly.
or management or leadership that understand what it's like for working parents have been really good at dealing with that. But some people, parents that I'm coaching and working with, their companies are not as understanding. Some of them work for companies where there's lots of very like young people, like startups, and they
Mhm.
don't have children yet. And a lot of them are living solo. And for them, they can work all day online. It's no problem. So I think
Yes.
just asking is really important. Yeah.
Yeah. And this may be one of the recalibrated changes that happens that prolongs itself into the future, is that companies may need to understand that they have to be more empathetic, they have to be more understanding of what people's situations actually are.
Yeah, and just more flexible in general. I think this might, I'd love to
Yes.
know, what do you think about how this will change the whole working world, flexible working? I mean, I was just on a group, and all these, it's a working moms group, and everyone was talking about, like, what is this going to look like when we go back? How are
Yeah.
we going to go back? Is it going to be a rotating schedule? Because they're thinking of things like, in London, they work in the city in high-rise buildings, and there's 6 elevators for like 40 floors of, hundreds of people are going in the morning. Those kind of things are going to matter when we recalibrate, right? Again.
Yeah. Exactly. I think the interesting thing, just even about the question, is though it's an opportunity for everybody to think about it, because in a way, this whole pandemic has sort of leveled the playing field in that we're all impacted in some way or another. Certainly not to say we're impacted in the same ways, because we're not. And you and I know how privileged we are
Yeah.
just to even be here together online tonight, and that we can do this.
Yeah.
But, it really puts us all in a creative mindset about looking for things that are working and how can we move those pieces forward in ways that are just equally productive, if not more so.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
nobody has the answers.
Yeah. And hopefully we will create them together, and they will, I think we're all
Exactly.
learning day by day. And I want to go back to this connection, because for me, it's just such a big piece of all of this. And you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned, I know that one way to connect is through communication, and primarily through listening. And that's something that I've always had to work on, because I'm really good at speaking and not always, and I don't mean just hearing, I mean listening deeply. So you wrote another article called Listening is Enough.
Mm-hmm.
And you said, and I love this, you said, in order to understand the power of listening, it helps to understand the power of having a receptive audience. And when I think about how we are communicating now via virtually, how has that been impacted as far as having a receptive audience? So can you tell us a little bit more?
Well, the place that article came from is that I watched one of those shows, which you may not have seen because of the US thing, where several of the late night personalities were broadcasting from home.
I have been watching it,
And then
and I'm bored out of my
okay,
mind. We're not going to mention
exactly,
any names.
exactly.
It's
So
terrible.
exactly, it's very hard for those folks to be able to project any kind of connection when they have no one warm sitting in the audience. Think about how we respond to someone who's a comic or our favorite music artist. It's like we applaud, we're like rapt, right? We're just waiting to sing the lyrics that we know.
Yeah.
And so that was where I got the idea. It's like, yes, absolutely. When you have no receptive audience, it's nearly impossible to really bring your heart, to bring your best self. So it's like that, though, for folks who basically have something important to say, but they have no one who's there to receive it. So when
Yeah.
you think about listening as a way of receiving, it actually is also quite active. Like you literally have to pick yourself up and put yourself over there with the other person. Really try to, as much as possible, climb into their shoes, their lives, their emotions, so that you get on some kind of a level deeper hearing what it is they're actually saying. And in empowering people, we have that activity called listening beyond the words. And we teach people you may not listen because you blame, or probably the best one, you may not listen because you're already imagining how you can fix it
Yeah.
for the other person. You don't have to fix it. If you just listen, they will work it out. If they
Yeah.
need help, they will ask you. So to me, it's been so freeing to think it's not only enough, it's more than enough. It's exceptional when you can really listen.
Yeah. And it's
I feel
really
pretty
hard.
passionately about that one, Joy.
You know what? And I love that, because for me, in the empowering people in the workplace, in that workshop, it's one of the most powerful. And you know what? I find it, as a facilitator, it's very difficult for me to lead, because it's been such a challenge for me to truly listen deeply. And I worry, right, about getting it wrong. But yet I know that the person will say, no, you're totally wrong. When I've done it as a participant, I'm not getting it all the time. And it really, we think because we hear, we listen, right? We hear sounds, we're listening. And we really have to understand, I'm very good at empathizing, right? But that's different than listening. It's a real skill, and it takes
It's a little
practice.
different. Yeah.
So can you give us some tips about that, about listening, being able to listen deeply, and not just listen to the feelings of the person, but even going further and listening to the needs or the wants of the person, right? What they really need.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you would ask for some tips because it's also curious that it's one of the first things we complain about people. Oh, they don't listen. We complain about our kids, they never listen. But when do we ever teach anybody actively to do it as a skill? We just assume people, because they're born with ears, they're going to know how to listen. So I think for me, when I went through coaches training, it was an ideal opportunity to really have someone teach me, here's how you listen. And one of the first places is just to recognize from your own awareness, I'm not listening. I'm in my own head. I'm preparing for what I will say next. To me, that's the first place, is just self-awareness. Notice when you're in your own head and then stop it and throw your attention, lean hard into looking at that other person, reading their body language, trying to get what's going on here, like on a deeper level.
Yeah.
So many things, if we want to change, we have to be aware. I'm not a very good listener. I'm in my head. I'm preparing my next statement.
And I think that is
So
for any change, the awareness is the first step to any change, isn't it? Like whatever behavior it
you
is.
can't make a change without being aware that you need to. Yeah, exactly.
And I'm aware
Yeah,
of it. It also then takes the steps, right? Like I know for one of the ways that I'm practicing listening, there's two things for me because empathy, showing empathy is a way to show you're listening, but that I feel is more natural to me. But one of the things I'm doing is sometimes I'll paraphrase, and that will help me kind of, you know,
sure.
really force myself to pay attention, and it helps me figure out if I've made any mistakes and what their needs are or what they're saying. But also
Absolutely.
asking questions. That's a big one for me. Is instead of giving advice, which is what I can tend to do, is stepping back and asking a question, even if it's just, oh, tell me more, just drawing forth from
Yeah.
the person a little bit more. That's what I'm really practicing. Yeah, I'm seeing.
Yeah.
So, okay, so we have some folks from Poland on. Hi. It works when we don't have the plan in our minds and we prepare for all the options. So I think it's kind of similar. I think what
Mm-hmm.
and Jixia, I'm not
Yeah.
sure I'm saying that correctly, is saying is similar to what you were saying, Dina, about having already preparing what we're going to say or having our thoughts and opinions already there, so we're not even
Yeah.
open. I think that's so important. And
Yeah.
I do
Agree.
want to read. I love this because I love the way I'm going to quote you from this article because I think you've already mentioned some of it, and one of the things I love that you mentioned was the leaning in. It's almost like a physical, you can do it, lean in. So
Yes.
I'm going to read this quote from your article, which I really love. The real power of listening is underrated. Not only is it enough, it is extraordinary. If you really want to improve relationships with others at home, at work, and in your community, lean in and shut up. I feel like you're speaking to me just when you say that. And then just to finish the sentiment, allow your energy to be fully present with the person who is speaking. I promise that you will know what is needed next. The speaker will tell you. And I just love that. I might actually put that up on my wall, Dina, if you don't mind, because
I'd be honored, Joy.
it's really powerful because, I think about, when you talk about all relationships, I feel like I'm really good at listening to my daughter and my students and my friends. I am not. And I don't know if Max, my husband, is usually listening to these when he's riding his bike downstairs. I don't know if he's on, but he's the first person that will tell you that I don't listen to him. Right. And I'll say the same thing. He doesn't listen to me. And I know in positive discipline, we talk about people will listen to you after they have felt heard. Right. We talk about children will listen to you after they have felt heard. And so this is it's a really good reminder. Um, so we have a little bit of time, just a few more minutes, if that's okay. I would love to talk.
Absolutely.
You mentioned earlier prioritizing, right? And kind of, prioritizing what's truly important each day and people. I would love to know from you, what are you prioritizing right now in your life each day? I know that's a
I'm
big
almost
question.
embarrassed to tell you.
No, please don't.
You know, last month when this started, I was with Fernanda Lee in Brazil. We were finishing up some empowering people in the workplace. We got on the last flight out of Brazil that American Airlines did. Yeah, on the very last day. So when I got home, it took me like 24 hours to get home. And I think I was in so much shock. And it's just so weird, right? It just took
Yeah.
at least a week for me to get my feet back on the ground. But what I noticed is that I started meditating. I started really trying to ground myself in sort of remembering who I am and what I needed to support my physical self, especially after being away and traveling and so forth. And it gave me like permission or a perfect opportunity to kind of think about, what do I want to prioritize in my life right now? And, you and I talked about how there's a lot of information out there right now. There are a lot of voices being heard. And I felt like I had to keep my voice quiet until I knew what my voice wanted to say.
Mm.
What I actually add to the conversation that was authentically for me, like what my value is. And that took me a little time, but I had to write, I had to listen to some things that felt inspiring, but I really had to prioritize my self care. And I
Yeah.
have done a pretty good job of continuing since I've been home.
That
So,
I hope that the listeners are hearing that, because
oh,
I really think that's been a struggle for people, is to, one of the things that is coming up when I'm working with anyone in corporate that I'm coaching in business, and I'm working with a lot of people in finance, right?
yeah,
And one of the things that is coming up is, there's mixed messages from the leadership team, right? They're saying we support you, and they're sending them. I mean, it's amazing,
yeah,
right? They're sending them. Even my husband he's getting, free exercise videos that they're giving, and nutrition stuff they're giving them, bombarding them with all of these resources,
hmm,
which no one has time to watch or do,
yeah,
right? But they're
yeah.
saying, we want you to prioritize self-care right now because we know how important that is, and find a work-life balance, right? And yet some of the messages, one of the people I'm coaching, obviously I'm not going to mention any names of companies, but they basically said, we're your jobs are safe. We're not going to be doing any layoffs until 2021. The message to some of the workers is actually, I better work my butt off now, so I'm not one of those people that gets laid off in
Hmm,
2021.
hmm,
And I mean, it's just, I'm not saying it's all companies, but some of the, I better prove myself now that I'm home, or I
hmm,
have to prove myself more now that I'm
hmm.
home, is something that some people are getting into. And I wonder if you have any thoughts or advice on that for people.
I guess the first thing that struck me, Joy, but it was more about the company than the client, and that is just I've been really aware of people making promises that they don't know that they're going to be able to keep, since none of us really knows how this whole thing is going to shake out. So that would be my first concern. But my second concern, I had a pretty huge aha moment, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, where I woke up in the middle of the night. I was at a training and I thought, I don't have to prove myself to anyone. And so it's a little bit like that. What if we could just accept what it is without trying to evaluate it? I think that proof thing can be like a game that we sign up for.
Yeah.
And so, what if you just brought your best self every day? What if you really led your life the way your heart and your mind and your soul wants you to lead it? And then just trusted that the universe was going to provide you the next step on the path if it happened to be a step away from that company that you're killing yourself to be at. So, for you and me both, it wouldn't be the first time we're coaching folks out the door rather than to stay put.
Mm.
At some point, we have to decide, is this working for me in my life or is it not?
Yeah. And does it match up with our values and our priorities, and
Exactly.
what's happening?
Yep.
Yeah. I think that's a really important message to kind of wrap up with, is really going back to that acceptance, and starting with acceptance of self,
Yes.
right? And that we are enough, we are doing enough.
Yeah.
Um, and we don't have to prove anything to ourselves or anyone,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah. And that self-care piece, I'm so glad that you mentioned that, as far as prioritizing that self-care, especially now. And I hope that what will happen is through people hopefully taking those messages on board, I hope that they will then carry it through when they do start going, when things start getting a little, we don't know what that will be, but when we start getting to a new normal, and that they'll carry a lot of these good habits of self-care to the future.
Yeah, and just to keep our priorities highlighted, period, however that looks for you.
You know, what reminds me when you talk about priorities, every time I hear the word priorities, I think about that experiment. I think it was a Harvard professor did it with his students with the rocks and the pebbles. Do you know that one? Right. So if just in case the viewers don't know it, it's a very simple, this professor holds up a jar. I think it was a beaker or something, and he poured a bunch of rocks in it. And he asked the students, he held it up and said, "Is this full?" And they said, "Yes, yes, of course it's full." And then he proceeded to take some pebbles and he dumped them in and they filled in the cracks between the rocks. And he said, "Is this full now?" And they said, "Yes, now it's full." And then he took some sand and he poured the sand in and it filled all the spaces between the rocks and the pebbles. And he said, "Now is it full?" And they said, "Yes, now it's full." And then I think this, as the story goes, he poured in his coffee and, you know, proceeded to show. And when he asked his students, and this is so powerful because I used to do this with my high school students when we talked about time management and prioritizing. And and we always ask, what was this really about? What was he trying to teach? And someone always says that you can always fit more in, right? That there's more, and that's like what we think, and it's not at all. It's the complete opposite, right? First of all, it's one thing that we all have equally is time. It doesn't matter how wealthy you are, privileged, you can't buy more time, right? We have 24 hours in a day, right? And so, you know, when we think about what those rocks represent, if you were to pour in the sand first, right? So if the sand represents, like, you know, Netflix and all of that, if you were to pour all of those lower priority things we enjoy, but if you poured that in first, there'd be no room for the pebbles and the rocks. So it's all about prioritizing, right? So right now we need to think about, what are our rocks? What do we prioritize right now? And I'm really happy to hear that a lot of people really are prioritizing family and reevaluating what that means for them, right? And that's big. I hope that's
inspiring joy.
Yeah. So, okay, well, we're almost at our time. So I'm trying to not take up too much of people's time, because I know that their priorities are to get some sleep and get some rest and have some downtime. So, Dina, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I always learn so much from you and your wisdom. And I'm sure you guys have noticed, Dina is one of the best listeners I know, I have to say. She's like a master listener. And so, you know, hopefully you guys will join us for, if you're interested, if you want to learn some of these tools for empowering the people in the workplace and keeping people connected and engaged and motivated, that you will join us hopefully in June, but keep an eye out on the Positive Discipline UK website, where you can register, and we will sign up for the newsletter so you can get the announcement when it will be posted. And Dina's website is her name, dinaemser.com. So you can check her out, and on LinkedIn as well. And next week we have a very I have 2 guests, and we're trying to coordinate who will do next week and who will do the following week. So I'll keep you posted. So look out on the Facebook page for the announcements. And until we see each other again, stay healthy, stay safe, and stay home. We'll see you soon. Bye.